All right. I hope everybody has finished the video. Um, it is kind of interesting how um, arsenic has been used in the past, the issues that it probably caused for many people, not only in England, but all over the world, because it was used in not just wallpaper, but it was put in medicines and paints and all kinds of different things. People just didn't have the knowledge exactly what arsenic would do to them. And there were other chemicals and things that you find in water that they were also using some really nasty things uh, in home situations. Anyway, let's start with the slide deck. Let me bring this up on your screen. So this first slide gives you my contact information. If again, this is going to be recorded, so if you don't want to take the time to write all that down, you don't have to. That's CET. I'm a certified environmental trainer. It's an honorarium that was given to me because of the amount of hours of training that I've presented, and I took an exam and had to go through many hours of training, train the trainer type stuff to get that. So that's all that means. That is my work cell phone number, and that is my work email address. Again, if you have any questions about training, about TRE hours, about renewing your license, things like that, I can be of assistance to you. If you are working to pass any of your exams, I can also help you with that, finding the right information to study for, etc. So don't hesitate to give me a call or email me anytime. I'm here for you. So we're going to talk today about arsenic in groundwater, obviously. And I think at least one of us in the class today has quite a bit of experience in the treating arsenic in waters. Many years ago, the EPA had asked that we put together some training presentations on arsenic removal. And you'll see some of the dates on this slide deck are fairly old. Some of you, in fact, some of you are young enough, probably may have just barely been born when some of this information was put together, but most of it is still relevant to what's going on today. And, again, it's probably not going to take 7 hours to get through, but we'll go through as quickly as possible. If you have any questions during the presentation, remember you can ask a question. Just go to the little bubble and ask it of me. I can't guarantee I'll answer it right away because I may not see it right away, but as soon as I do, I'll get back to you with the answer. A really good opportunity for you to ask the questions, however, will be during breaks. I will give frequent breaks because I know if you're like me, you don't want to sit in the chair or wherever you're sitting for many hours without getting up and moving around a little bit. So we'll go ahead and get started. So arsenic is a natural occurring element, right? So it's found in rock, soil, water, air. Natural concentrations of arsenic in soil typically range from 0.1 to 40 milligrams per kilogram. Higher concentrations are found in some igneous and sedimentary rocks, particularly in iron and manganese ores. Other natural sources of arsenic include volcanism, forest fires, erosion, weathering. Arsenic can be released to ground or surface waters. Arsenic is also released from a variety of human activities. Almost 8 million pounds of arsenic and arsenic-containing compounds are released into the environment as of 1997. Arsenic is found in preservative chromiated copper, also preserved wood. 90% of all arsenic consumed in the U.S. is used in the production of carbon type items. Arsenic can be a byproduct of mining or smelting, and is a particular concern in old waste disposal sites, i.e. mine tailings. In agriculture, organic arsenic is a constituent of organic herbicides and is a constituent of feed additives for poultry and swine. Other industries may process using chemicals that could possibly release arsenic. Manufacturers of metals, of alloys, and petroleum refinery pharmaceuticals, glass, cement. So there's a whole host and range of industry type things that could create arsenic releases. One of the main things that arsenic release through mining is a really, really serious issue out in the western part of the country. I attended a training session with all every state has a rural water component, and they get together for training once a year. And I was actually in a room with trainers from all 50 states, and the folks out west spend a lot of time dealing with arsenic issues because the amounts of different ore mines that are associated in the southwest region of the country. So it's a super big issue out there. It is a continuing issue here in Maryland, though. We see some arsenic issues in southern Maryland and the eastern shore. So there are arsenic treatment facilities around the state, and a variety of different treatment methods can and are used in our state as well as the surrounding states. But it is an issue that needs to be dealt with because of some of the health issues that can occur. Hopefully, for those of you that aren't looking at a teeny tiny phone, you can see this map shows kind of an illustration of the amounts of arsenic potential that are in the water around the country. You can see, if you can read the scale, you can see Maryland sits in a nice little range of it, maybe not as high as some other states, but you can see essentially most of Maryland is sitting on some type of arsenic groundwater site. So again, on the eastern shore in southern Maryland, it is an issue, and those folks that are operating those facilities are actively treating for the arsenic issues that are out there. This next map is the percentage of community water systems with a mean arsenic above 10 parts per billion, and 10 parts per billion is the MCL for the arsenic currently. This map is going to show you what the expected rates of arsenic concentration in source water occur around. The darker shades show the higher percentages of systems with levels of arsenic in their source water. The darker shades, over 6% of all community water systems in many western states, Michigan and some New England states, have a mean arsenic concentration above the revised MCL. EPA compiled this map from available compliance data. As noted on the map, though, almost half of the states did not provide their compliance data at the time that this was made. You can see it was made in 2001. I checked an updated map, and most of the states have submitted at least some data, but it's still incomplete to this day. All right, here's some different states of arsenic. As you'll see, the different forms of arsenic. Arsenic 0 essentially is the elemental form of arsenic. Arsenic 3 is arsenite, and it's generally found in groundwater, and for the most part in Maryland, that's what we're dealing with, is the groundwater, the AS3 version. AS5 is arsenate. It can be in oxygenated groundwater, but its majority is found in the surface water environment. So the video really did a good job of explaining some of the health effects that arsenic had in Victorian England. Arsenic ingestion has been linked to both cancerous and non-cancerous health effects. These include cancers of the bladder, lungs, skin, kidney, nasal passages, liver, and prostate. Arsenic ingestion has also been linked to cardiovascular, pulmonary, immunological, and neurological effects. All this information I'm sharing with you can be found on the EPA's websites. They really have do a good job of explaining the effects of arsenic, and I encourage you to go to those sites and look at it. They also have some information relative to what's going on in the treatment of arsenic. I'm required to, as part of this presentation, to show you some of the EPA videos. They do a really good job on some of the videos, but they're a little older now, and some of the technology has advanced well beyond what we're going to see in the videos coming up. I hate to play cheesy videos, but it's required as part of this class, so you're going to have to at least take a look at them. All right, arsenic regulations. We're going to talk about some of that stuff. Like any other rule that EPA puts in place and the states follow along with, they always set up some type of a maximum contamination level. They'll set up some type of maximum goal that you should be striving for. And if you've been in the industry long enough, you'll know that those goals typically change, right? They never really get higher, they get lower. And when the technology for removing not just arsenic, but any of the other regulated contaminants, as technology improves, those goals tend to go down. They never really go up at all. So some of the technologies that exist to remove arsenic currently, none of them are going to be cheap. Some of them, such as membrane filtration, the prices for those types of things are actually going down now. Some of in our industry does a really good job of improving how it operates and how it makes things. So if you, for instance, if you would talk about membrane filtration just 10 years ago, the cost of not only the membranes, but operating the systems were enormous. It took a lot of energy to drive water through those membranes. The technology's advanced where those costs are now coming down. So again, anything in our industry when you're removing contaminants is costly. Some of those costs are now being lowered through better technology. So here is the arsenic regulations, and you can see the dates on that. They're not proposed rules anymore. They're actually, these are in place. So you want to take a quick look at that. Again, these rules will probably come down. So in the proposed, which is now the existing arsenic rule, was put in the Federal Register in June 22nd of 2000, and it proposed to revise the existing rules for arsenic and change it into 5 parts per billion. Okay, so that was the original proposal. Requests and comments from the industry. One of the industry folks, people that are actually going to treat the water, had recommended settings anywhere, or maximum contamination levels from anywhere to 12 to 10, and some as low as 3 were proposed. In October of that same year, in 2000, the appropriations bill requiring the EPA to have a final standard was applied on June 22nd. The final arsenic rule was published January of 2001 and established the MCL at 10 parts per billion. So they did kind of listen to the industry a little bit. Their original proposal was that 5, but after listening to the industry and helping them understand what that proposal would do, what the cost would be, they actually brought the final rule up a little bit from 5 to 10. But that, again, subject to change at any time and probably will change. Early in 2001, the Bush administration pulled back the rule to take additional steps to reassess the scientific issues associated with it. That was the 5 parts per billion rule. So, and because of the importance of the arsenic rule, the national debate surrounding the related science and costs of EPA's administrator publicly announced in March of 2001 that the agency would take additional steps to reassess the scientific cost of what they were asking for in their rule. Again, these different things can be found at EPA, and these were some of the groups that were involved in deciding what the outcome of that rule would be. They talked about implementing a slidable standard, things like that, where smaller municipalities could shed the cost out over many years and things like that. So they took all those things into account before they set the final standard MCL for this. So after all the talk and all the action, this is what finally occurred. The Administrator Whitman announced there would be no further delay in implementing the January 2001 bill. So they went ahead and implemented it. So here it is. EPA promulgated that rule of 10 in January of 2001. There's your maximum goal. Obviously is 0. Any type of contaminant that has a legitimate health risk, the goal is always 0. EPA revised this rule to add a 0 to make the MCL 0.010 milligrams per liter. That because the science gets better on how you can detect things, you can start adding zeros to make sure that it's an actual true goal. And so the scientific testing can sometimes drive what final outcomes of some of these things end up being. It also adds new requirements for consumer confidence reports. So if you have an arsenic issue, and anytime you test for arsenic, those things would have to show up in your consumer confidence reports. So it also required the Tier 2 public notification if there was any type of arsenic issue. You also have the Tier 2 notification for your testing for arsenic. And here were the initial deadlines for the requirements for the existing systems. Compliance was January of 2006. For any new sources, compliance date was of January of 2004. So this is essentially what they said. The new MCL applies to all community water systems and non-community water systems, regardless of size. Estimate that 3,000 water system would exceed that nationwide. Groundwater systems must sample every 3 years. And one of you folks said earlier that you don't treat for groundwater, but you test it every 3 years. That's why. Surface water systems must test for it annually. Surface water, you guys operate surface water treatment systems. Understand that you often don't know exactly what type of water quality is going to come into your facility. That's one of the reasons why surface water systems will be tested annually. So here were some different rules that came in with it. One of the options was available were systems of use, point of use or point of entry treatment devices. And we'll talk about some of those in this class. 2 treatment methods for that point of use or point of entry were reverse osmosis or activated aluminum. Point of entry and point of use units had to be owned and controlled and maintained by the public water system or a contractor. The units had to have alarms. EPA estimated those costs is suitable for systems with less than 100 service connections. So that part, the point of entry, point of use rule went into effect as well. Here's some exemptions. Allow states to grant exemptions for variances of state adopted variance exemption regulations. Not all the states adopted these rules. A lot of states just went ahead and implemented the rule as outlined by the EPA standard. Therefore, it's likely that states will only grant exemptions under enforceable administrative consent order. So if the director or presidential order dictated it, then that would be the only time that they would grant consent at this point. So here's some of the compliance requirements, and you can read along with me. These systems monitoring annually or less often. MCL exceedance triggers quarterly monitoring. So if you ever got to the point where you're testing and we're testing and you saw an uptick of arsenic in your raw water, if it ever exceeded that MCL, it would trigger the quarterly monitoring. Violations based on 4 quarters of monitoring, which is standard for most of the different standards that are tested for. Violations, unless the sample will cause the running annual average to exceed the MCL. So that's just based on the quarterly average of all of the 4 quarters. Violation of annual average exceeds the MCL. So one of the ways people could probably were trying to get around that was spacing different contaminated well sources on and off between the 4 quarters to try to stay under the number. Many places still do that, but keep in mind how the sampling and how they average affects the overall MCL if you're doing that. I'm sure for those of you that are operating these systems understand that, and those types of things were engineered. So here's the compliance determination as specified. They had sampling each sampling point. So you can follow along step one. If it was under that 10 parts, or if it was below that, it would, or above, it would take a required confirmation sample of the average results. Step 2B, if average of less than 10 parts per million, you had to begin quarterly sample. After 4 consecutive quarters, determine running annual average by adding results and dividing the numbers taken. So if you're interested in the math portion of this, you come to my math class in June, and we'll talk about it. But the compliance determination things that happened in the early 2000s led to many of the different type of treatment systems that we are currently operating in the Maryland, Southern Maryland and Eastern Shore region. So here's the different approved methods, and these are important because when the EPA comes out with testing guidelines and NDE follows it up, they follow up with specific types of testing and testing techniques. So here's the different method and how they go about doing it. I am not a lab expert by any means, and maybe I probably have some of you here probably know what each and every one of these means, but I'm not one of those. What's important here is to understand the different tests that have been approved for this, and there may be some more that aren't on this list right now. So during our first break, if anybody knows of any newer types of testing, please, you can speak up, send me a note, and I will put that up on the screen for everybody. So consumer information for arsenic. The 1996 addendums to the Safe Drinking Water Act focused on increased public safety and public safety's right in the public's right to know provisions. In response, EPA promulgated the Consumer Confidence Report rule and revisions for public notification. The rule to increase the quantity and quality of information that customers receive. And for those of you that have to put those reports together, it's a lot of information that goes into those reports. And that's the good news. There's a lot of information. The bad news for us is we have to put all that information in there. And the even worse news is, as you know, most people, when they get their consumer confidence report, they never look at it. It goes into the garbage. So we spend a lot of time doing it. People don't spend a lot of time looking at it unless there's an issue, then all of a sudden everybody's looking at it. But those were issues back in '96. The Consumer Confidence Safe Drinking Water rules were changed to do that. I think it's a good thing. It is important, I believe, for people to understand what type of water they're drinking, what they're putting into their bodies. So in 2001, the arsenic rule updates the specific Consumer Confidence Report health effects in their language for arsenic. And again, if you go on the EPA's website, a lot of this information can be found there as well. It also requires the inclusion of informational educational statements under certain conditions, which means if you've tested and you have arsenic, it was a good idea then and probably still is that you educate people to what that arsenic level is and what its possible effects are. And if you're treating for arsenic, the types of treatment that you're doing. So systems had to begin complying with those as of February of 2002. And also the systems had to provide public notice for violations, and in certain other circumstances, if those violations were excessive, there were other things they would have to do. That part of the policy, the notification part, came into effect in May 6th of 2002. So here's some major points. So for this particular one, all community water systems had to deliver their consumer confidence reports to customers by July 1st of each year. And that's been the standard ever since. The Consumer Confidence Report provided a snapshot of water quality over a preceding year. And it also dictated what type of consumer confidence reports, what went into the consumer confidence reports. in your reports, if you don't know, if you don't work on them, certain things like a brief summary of this, you had to have your source water, what your primary source water is in your report, a summary of a susceptibility to contamination. So you had to tell your customers how things could be contaminated, how to get a copy of the water system's complete source water assessment. So that's the public information aspect of it. The level and range of levels of any contamination that you may find through testing, and the MCLs or the EPA standards for what that testing range is, and any likely source of contamination for whatever the contaminant is specified. You also had to have health effects language, what that contaminant could possibly cause. It required compliance records. So if you weren't keeping records on your testing and things, it required you to do so. And again, that educational statement had to go in there so people could understand exactly what some of those effects were. Phone numbers, additional information about the water system, and EPA Safe Drinking Water Hotline. All those things were required to be in the consumer confidence reports. And to this day, those things are still the required information that goes into them. I don't know how well you folks using a small phone can see any of these, uh, but this deals with the Safe Drinking Water Act requirements as well, um, for your consumer confidence report. So it's just basically a little flow chart for things. So the Safe Drinking Water reports allows EPA administration to require systems to include health effects language for the three regulated contaminants, even if the system is not violated MCL. So even if you're meeting the MCL, you're required to do these things. EPA believes that the customer should be provided the most current understanding of the risk potential for arsenic. Currently, systems must include health effects information for sampling. So I'm not going to go through all the different things that get included with that. You can read that spreadsheet and understand the different information that's going to be required. So here's an example of what some of those health effect language could look like. So you can read the bullets for health effects. This is just boilerplate language that most places use. Some people who drink water containing arsenic in the excess of the mass contaminant level for years experience skin damage problems with circulatory system, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to read them all out to you. And then there's an example of boilerplate information for the information about it. So again, I encourage you to look at the information on the EPA website. They may have updated some of these health effect statements and informational statements for not just arsenic, but also for other regulated contaminants. Here's the public notification rule. I'll give you a chance to read through there. You can see the dates that go along with that. For in 2006, the application start. Again, this is all listed in the EPA guidelines. You can go on EPA.gov, I believe, and see this. So the bottom bullet, the tier 3 for arsenic monitoring testing violations. So here's the overall arsenic regulation again. Standard set at 10 parts per billion. Some states have considered actually lowering them with their state primacy agency. The extensions were available, and this was back in 2006. Those extensions now are up, but in Maryland, 19 systems were in non-compliance, 12 systems with exemptions, 32 MCL violations for 5 systems, 28 monitoring violations as of October 31st of 08. So that was the direct effect that these rules had on some of the Maryland facilities. And for the Maryland facilities that had those violations, of course, you had to report that because it was part of your CCR and monitoring requirements. You also, if you had levels that high, you had to add treatment aspects. So we're going to start going into what some of those treatment aspects are, because that's the purpose of our class today. So, check the time here. It's 9:55. Let's take a quick 10-minute break. We'll meet back at 10 o'clock, and we'll start going through the different treatment methods uh, for removing or mitigating arsenic issues. So go ahead, get up, walk around, get yourself some coffee, use the restroom, whatever you need to do, and we'll be back here at 10. Welcome back, folks. I hope everybody is got up and stretched. You're awake again. So the next couple segments, we're going to talk about the different treatment options that are available. There's a lot of scientific charts and graphs and things that are in this presentation because they had to be, and it was put together a combination between some operations people and some engineering folks. So the engineering folks put some serious scientific data into this thing. We're not going to concentrate a lot on the scientific information. If you are interested, however, again, you'll get a copy of this and you can look more closely at the charts and graphs and things like that. So let me bring back up the PowerPoint presentation for everybody. Second one. Stop it for 1 second so I can turn my camera off so you don't have to stare at me the whole time. I'll bring it up. All right, so as I said, the next, basically the rest of the program will deal with the different types of treatment methods that are available and out there, many of which are being used currently in Maryland. So lots of design plants around these different types of treatment concepts. So we'll spend some time on each one of those. If your source water was over that MCL for those 4 quarters and it became an issue, you had some options back when the rule was applied, right? So here's some options. Could you replace the source? Was that a possibility? If it was arsenic in well water, could you drill to a different aquifer where there wasn't as much arsenic or no arsenic? Could you have well modifications? Could you screen out a layer of the aquifer that may have higher arsenic levels into another area of the aquifer that had lower? Could you blend 2 different sources, maybe 2 different wells, one that had a higher level of arsenic, one that had a low level of arsenic? And then the last one was treatment. So here's some different options that people had. Of course, none of these options, maybe the possible exception of blending, were items that were going to have no cost. Even with blending, you probably had a cost of being able to control the flow of both of those different wells or both of those different water sources. So we talked a little bit about the types of arsenic earlier in the presentation. You'll see a little bit more about that during this part of the presentation. But here's some different conventional treatment technologies that are in use and were in use when this program was created: coagulation with co-precipitation and filtration, adsorption. So with the adsorption, you would stick the arsenic particles onto some type of adsorbent material. Ion exchange, lime softening, and then last but not least, membrane. So these were available technologies and still are. And we'll talk a little bit about each one, positives, negatives, all that type of stuff. So in our room today, I know there's people that probably are doing some, if not all, of these types of treatment on arsenic or for some other type of contaminants. People probably have experience in operating facilities that use these types of treatment methods. So again, arsenic specifications. We talked about an earlier slide, arsenic 3 and arsenic 5, or they're also known as arsenite and arsenate. If you have an arsenic 3, You add oxidation, changes the arsenic. It changes the arsenic state. It's important to remember that arsenic 3 is difficult to remove. Arsenic 5 is easier to remove. Oxidizing with chlorine, I think, somebody from MES that spoke earlier is probably one that said they were doing some of this. So oxidizing with chlorine, ozone, or potassium permanganate. The reason for that type of oxidation, rather than using simple aeration, where a lot of entrained metals in well water can be released with just adding oxygen to it. In the case of ozone, of arsenic, it's not that simple. It needs a stronger oxidizer to get the job done. So keep that in mind as we go through. So here's some factors and why certain treatments were selected over others. So factors in design and things like that. So big factor, arsenic concentration. How much arsenic are we talking about? Are we at extremely high levels? Are we at just over the MCL levels? Those types of things drove selection of what the best process would be for your particular facility. The water chemistry, was there some helpful or harmful things in the water that would help precipitate the arsenic? Space and simplicity, would we have to go out and buy another piece of property and build a brand new treatment plant to do this, to remove the arsenic? So, or could we retrofit certain items? And so that space and simplicity came into play. Capital costs. Anytime you build anything or change the treatment process, obviously you're going to have costs that go along with that. And depending on what treatment option that you're going to talk about, it could change the operating costs. I discussed earlier membrane filtration. The cost of the electrical costs of operating those systems are higher than it would be in a normal conventional treatment system. Operational considerations, and what's meant by that is the ease of operation of the facility. Is the facility going to become so sophisticated that it's going to be hard to operate it, do operations and maintenance on things? And last but not least, waste disposal, because we're going to be removing a hazardous metal, right? So we have to have the ability to send that to waste somehow, right? So all these things were in consideration in designing and selecting the best treatment for the arsenic levels that you have. So let's talk about the waste disposal option, the waste disposal issue, the determination of feasible technology for the arsenic are more controlled. The realities of residual handling and disposal concerns and those associated with primary treatment technology. So that is from an article. And again, you're dealing with a hazardous material. So that the reality of that is that that you're going to have to deal with that in a different way than you would say if you were making an iron removal plant or a manganese removal plant, things like that. So water chemistry and the makeup of your water is important when we're dealing with arsenic removal. So arsenic concentration is important, the pH levels, nitrates, iron, interfering ions, so things that could interfere with your ability to effectively remove the arsenic concentration. So here's some of the things that had to be taken into account on a selection process of what type of removal system that you would use. So again, this chart, and I know for those of you that are using a teeny tiny phone screen for it, it's probably going to be hard for you to read. And again, I apologize. There's a lot of scientific data that went into this, and is expressed on this sheet. So just the top line talks to you about what each category means for iron-based technology, aluminum-based technology, anion exchange media, reverse osmosis, coagulation-aided membrane filtration. Those are the type of treatments. The next line down talks about the type of arsenic that can be removed using that treatment. It talks about the ranges of pH that's needed for that particular type of treatment. Talks about the silica components, how much effect the silica may have, sulfate may have, phosphates, fluoride, those types of things. And even temperature can be a factor in some of the treatment methods used. So this is just a matrix of considerations for the different technologies. And there's other technologies that aren't listed on this particular graph or chart. So here is, in my mind, at the time that this was created, the most common used arsenic groundwater treatment methods, right? Oxidation, co-precipitation, and filtration, the absorptive or throwaway type medias, and ion exchange. Now, I'm not so sure that in this day and age that those are the most commonly used ones. I think membrane filtration probably is in that top 3 now, but these are still commonly used ways of dealing with the arsenic. So let's talk about the arsenic co-precipitation method, right? So what's good about it is essentially using conventional type treatment with iron and aluminum coagulants. So that's going to help in the arsenic mitigation, right? So it can be done with existing facilities for the most part. So softening plants at existing facilities, coagulation filtration using sand or other medias, microfiltration also, which is a form of membrane, and oxidation filtration for iron removal type plants. So this co-precipitation process is more in line with the conventional type treatment processes that people in our industry were used to using. So the different coagulants that would go into effect for an arsenic type removal. For this particular case, the coagulants, the influent arsenic levels has no impact on the effectiveness of the coagulation process. So whatever type of coagulant you're going to use, if it falls in the range that the specifications are looking for, then the arsenic itself won't have an impact on that process. You'll still be able to flock any other type of sediments that you're looking to. The ideal iron to arsenic ratio for this particular type of treatment would be 20 or 30 to 1. The pH of less than 8 is less efficient flock and precipitation formation, which could be an issue. So depending on the source water that you have coming in, that may or may not be an issue. Higher arsenic removal rates observed with similar coagulation dosage if the pH is reduced to below 7. So just some key factors in determining the type of chemicals, the type of pH and things that you would need for this particular form of treatment. So when we're talking about this form of treatment, we're talking about precipitating the arsenic itself. And this type of treatment is commonly used for turbidity removal with ferric chloride, ferric sulfate, or any type of alum-based product. So again, if you went to my coagulation class the other day, we talked about a lot of this. We didn't talk about it as a way to remove arsenic, but the precipitates are first mixed with high energy, coagulated, slow solids are saddled, then removed, adding polymers or other type material, right? Coagulation and sedimentation can suspend the solids, organics, and trace metals like arsenic in the drinking water. So there is an ability through these processes, through a conventional treatment system, that mitigate some of the arsenic, or in some cases all of the arsenic, based on how high the levels are, whether your water, your influent water is in the right range for this type of treatment. So here is, and I don't know how well, again, with you folks, if you're using a small phone, can see this graph. It has the coagulant dose and the ability of arsenic removal. So if you look on the left-hand side, that's the percentage of removal. The bottom line is talking about the dosage of coagulant. So you can follow along there. You get the higher percentage of of removal with a higher dosage rate. So, so again, with any other coagulant, what you're trying to do is destabilize the ion, in this case, the arsenic ion, to make it readily adhere to other particles that you would later flock and turn into sedimentation. And ultimately, if it doesn't go through that process, it would get filtered out at the end point. So this next chart is another scientific model that talks about the influence of coagulation dose and coagulation pH. So you can see dosage versus the pH, what the effect is. And again, sorry for you folks with really small screens. None of this stuff will be in any type of test or anything, so I wouldn't worry about it. But it's a quick glance of one of the initial slides talked about pH being a factor. This kind of shows it to you, the effectiveness of removal based on the how high a pH is. So this next thing we're talking about, precipitation and filtration. In this particular case, they're again using an iron-based coagulant. Arsenic reacts very well and adheres to iron-based substances, so that's ferric chloride and ferric sulfate, those types of things. Again, with any coagulant that we're talking about when we're on the ferric side, there's some drawbacks with using that type of thing. If it passes through your treatment process, you're going to get rusty water calls, red water calls, things like that. But it has its advantages in removing or in helping to remove arsenic. So iron in a raw water aids in the process by reducing the coagulant dosage. So because arsenic can adhere to iron, it's helpful in this particular treatment method. Ideally, 20 to 30 times the iron concentration is the help. For it's 1 to 1.5 milligrams of iron for 50 UGLs of arsenic. Iron is oxidized using an oxidant. So in this particular treatment process, you can oxidize with chlorine, ozone, or potassium permanganate. Oxidation also converts arsenite, and if it's present, to arsenate, which is much easily treated. Oxidation causes ferric hydroxide formation, which helps with flock, as we know. Arsenate species combines with ferric hydroxide to form a benign ferric arsenate. So this benign ferric arsenate can be precipitated or completely removed using a filtration process. So again, just kind of stating this out again, the co-precipitation filtration effect, you're oxidize the arsenic, you're converting it into a more easily treated form of the arsenic using the chlorine or potassium permanganate. You coagulate flock formation, just a typical conventional treatment type thing. You add the ferric chloride or ferric sulfate, co-precipitate iron and arsenic together. You can either filter it with standard filters. If there's still an issue with arsenic still too high through this process, there is an opportunity to retrofit with membranes, which some places have chosen to do. Others have had success with just standard conventional treatment using standard conventional type filters. So here's another graph that'll be hard to see for you folks, but I'm sorry about that. But here's a graph of the removal as a function of the iron chlorine dose. So if you look at the bottom, you can see the iron and chlorine dosage in milligrams per liter and the arsenic removal rates. And you can see after the dose gets up to 10 milligrams per liter, the line kind of steadies out. But it really does give you a pretty good iron removal, or excuse me, arsenic removal by simply using that iron type of coagulant, because that iron has an inherent effect for the arsenic. The last stage is the filter type. Again, if you had my class on Tuesday, we talked about different types of medias. There's all kinds of different medias out there. Sand, green sand, coated sands, so sands that are designed specifically to to be coated with a substance that makes the arsenic or whatever material you're trying to remove adhere to it better. High rate medias. So there's catalytic media, pyrrolysite-based medias, things like that that can be used. So here's a typical layout. And again, I don't know how easily it'll be for people to see. Typical treatment layout for what one of these facilities could possibly look at. So you can see the incoming water. It's hit initially with the oxidant, then the coagulant mixed together. All right, so you have your standard settling at flock situation, and then you have your filters at the end. You have backwash recovery, solids recovery. So it's a standard conventional treatment type format, just using the iron-based coagulants and oxidizing with either chlorine, and for most cases in Maryland, it's going to be chlorine, but could be ferric, could also be ferric. So, or excuse me, potassium permanganate. Just a basic line diagram of what one of those facilities look like, and it looks, for all intents and purposes, it looks like a conventional water treatment facility. But here's some important things to understand about this type of treatment. So the pre-oxidation dosage is important because you need to have the conversion. Your media profile is important to have enough type of media to be able to adhere all the arsenic to. Background iron concentration, big important. So if you have a high amount of background iron concentration, it is very helpful in removing the arsenic. In some cases, you may not even have to use the ferric type coagulant. So the iron dosage, which is referring to your ferric chloride, if necessary. Hydraulic loading rates with any facility, very important. You have to have enough time for whatever you're trying to settle out. In the case that we're talking about today is arsenic, you have to have enough time for that to happen. Filter run lengths, of course, are always important no matter what you're treating for. And then the arsenic precipitates as ferric arsenate. So it's bound to the iron particle, whether it's through the natural iron in the water or the ferric that you're using as your coagulant. Backwash, return, and recover, and recycle. Again, when we talk about the backwash, return, and things like that, we have to understand that we are concentrating arsenic. So the return and recovery water sometimes can be an issue, which we'll talk about later. And for sure, settled solids disposal will be an issue because that settled solids will have a concentration of of arsenic that could be dangerous. Here's another little line diagram. In this one, you can see I'm in no way using this diagram to say Lane-Ox media is the best media for your filters, because it may not be, but in this particular case, I got this slide from somebody from Lane. That's what they had shown on there. So again, this is a different diagram showing how the filters for this particular plant would work using the filter media that is prescribed specifically to remove iron, so that arsenic, so the arsenic particles can adhere to it. Just a line drawing of what that would look like, and how you would hit it with oxidant and things like that. I know it's hard to see. So hydraulic loading, I spoke a little bit about it a second ago. So with any filter, it's designed for a certain amount of flow in gallons per minute per square foot, and that applies to any type of media, any type of filtration. So it's also dependent on the type of filter media that you were using. So typically it could be 3 to 9 gallons per minute per foot, right? And also it affects the size of the filter that you would choose. So if you have a higher flow rate that you're trying to put through a facility, you may need to have a larger size filter. And that would apply to any type of removal of any type of sedimentation or any type of materials, not just the arsenic. It could be anything else you're trying to remove. So when we go down these bullets with this type of conventional treatment, although we're talking about arsenic, it could apply to any of the sediments that we may have to remove. And if you're having a larger size of filter, obviously it could impact the plant footprint, which is expensive, and the equipment cost, again, which could be expensive. And just a rough estimate of how large filters could be here. So you'd have to determine what the loading rate is and by piling. And so essentially there, if you look down for the 1,000 gallon per minute flow rate, you would need 4 filters and different sizes for your gallons per minute per square foot. So you can see the different sizes and what that means, how much water you can put through. And of course, smaller filters are cheaper to construct. Yes, they are. Filter run length, very important in our industry, right? We don't want to be clogging our filters up and having to wash them more than necessary. So we try to get as much treatment done ahead of the filters. But for it's filter run length is going to be dependent on the water quality, depending on the media, how much media you have, what type of media, those types of things. It's also going to be very dependent on the loading rate, how much material is going into them, right? How much are we moving ahead of them? We're moving ahead of the filters, which is a big factor in how long your filter run length will be. And removal rates ahead of your filter could be the design basis of what type of media, what type of filter you want at your facility. Also, the design basis available of backwash water, ease of operation, number of filters or filter cells, obviously. Ease of operation is going to be important in any one of these choices of treatment. You don't want your plant so sophisticated and complicated that a normal operator or a maintenance person cannot operate or maintain. So here, you'll see some videos later on about some of these piloted plants. So this particular one is showing a pilot plant of overall removals. And this particular one is a Phoenix pilot of this particular plant. And it has the raw water characteristics. And then it shows you what the filtrate rate is. And I know it's going to be hard for you guys to see, but you can see over time the filtration rate of this particular piloted plant. And I think one of our videos actually is going to show you that particular plant. I think it's this plant. So we're going to talk the next couple of slides about piloting, and most facilities, before they determined which type of treatment process to use, did pilot things. And I don't know for the people that are at the class today that are running these facilities, whether somebody piloted this before they put the full-blown treatment process in effect or not, but chances are they probably did. And pilot testing for these types of things are great because you can determine your chemical feed requirements, your backwash frequency, and the quantity and quality of your wastewater product, right? So what you're losing through your filtration process or your membrane process, because it's going to be important, again, because that wastewater quantity and the concentration of arsenic in there will be an issue. Here's some good things, factors in favor of choosing this type of precipitation filtration treatment. So presence of iron and manganese in raw water at or above the MCL for those contaminants makes an ideal triple contaminant removal process. So if you have iron and arsenic, if you have iron and you have manganese and arsenic, it's kind of a win-win-win because it can all be removed in a very similar format. For arsenic concentrations at levels 10 to 100 parts per billion and pHs between 5 and 9, right? So lots of facilities probably have, particularly well facilities, probably have those ranges of iron, arsenic, and pH conditions, right? Stable process over pH ranges encountered in groundwater, and that's very key because groundwater changes very little over time as far as pH, temperature, and iron, manganese, and for that matter, arsenic levels change very infrequently over time. So once you get your facility up and running, it's pretty much you're treating the same way over and over, unless you decided to test a different chemical or something. Simple pump treat. And it's what I mean by well understood is this is what we do, right? We operate conventional type treatment plants. So in this, if you're using this format, operators who may have operated a different type of facility for treatment of arsenic removal can come to your facility and go, oh, this is conventional treatment. I know how to operate this. Chemical feeds, chlorination, ferric chloride for low background iron water. So if you don't have the iron load, you could go with the ferric chloride and essentially do the same thing. Skill level required. I don't mean none of these plants are low degree of complexity. But what I mean by that is these are things that we already do, right? So it's not, you're not training about how to run additional types of treatment that aren't typically used. Residuals management, backwash recovery, settling of solids, recycled supernatant, and disposal of ferric arsenate, and benign salt that may be non-hazardous, right? So some of these disposal methods could be non-hazardous, but others may not be, right? Highly effective when affected with a catalytic media such as Lanox, here's Lanox again, or AD26. So I won't go into a sale for them, but there's different types of media out there that work, that have these types of manganese coatings and things that arsenic, iron, and for that matter, iron and manganese readily adhere to, which would help in the overall removal of any type of iron, arsenic, or manganese that escapes through your sedimentation process. All right, next one we're going to talk about is the adsorption method of treatment. And I don't know if anybody here is actually using the adsorptive method of treatment. It's not an uncommon treatment method, but used in treating for arsenic. It has some good and bad things like any other treatment process for arsenic removal. So absorption is a physical or chemical process by which the contaminant or the absorbate in a water accumulates on a solid, the absorbent. So when I say a lot of people get adsorption confused with absorption. So they absorption is AB, adsorption is AD, right? So what I always tell people is, if you think about this, if you take your fist and you squeeze your fist together, and you take a pencil or whatever, and you stick it to the side of your fist, that's adsorption. That pen is stuck to the outside of your fist, right? If it's absorption, what you do is you open your fist a little bit and you put the pen inside your fist. That's absorption. That means that particular particle has absorbed the other particle into it. But when we're talking about absorption, we're talking about the property, whether it's physical or electromagnetic, of a particle sticking to the outside of something. So physical absorption works on electrostatic type forces, positive or negative ions. And if you went to my coagulation class, you'll understand that. If not, there's specific ions that work kind of like magnets. So if a iron charge is normally a positive charge, as is arsenic, if I'm going to have a chemical adsorbent or a filter media adsorbent, I'm going to have the opposite charge to get it to stick like a magnet. So that's why the physical absorption properties are important. You wouldn't want to choose the wrong coagulant or the wrong type of filter media to do this. Chemisorption, absorption occurs due to formation of chemical bonds between the adsorbate and the absorbent. So to a certain extent, coated medias and things like that can have a chemisorbent effect as well. So in the absorption, how it would work in your treatment process, water passes through the media in the filter vessel, so the water is flowing through there. And then because of that electrochemical bond, arsenic would bond to that media. Okay, it would stick to the outside of the media grain, whichever media you're choosing. At media capacity, arsenic will break through, and that would be for any contaminant. So after a while, once your filter media is fully used up, meaning that the particles have either adsorbed completely surrounding the filter media and have filled in all the annual spaces between the filter media, at some point, that filter becomes less and less effective, and more of what you're trying to treat for will come through. In the absorptive method, a lot of times we're using throwaway type medias. So when that happens, when you get that media gets at capacity, you would replace the media. Or in certain situations, there's chemical treatments that can happen to the media, and then the media can be replaced after the chemical treatment. In this particular case, because of what we're changing the ion for arsenic into, it's less hazardous, and most of the spent media for this type of use could be disposed at non-hazardous waste landfills. And I have the question mark there next to it because those rules could change at any time. Landfill rules around the country change all the time. And for those of you on the wastewater side, you know that because when you try the land application things in Maryland have changed so much. We're sending wastewater sludge all over the country trying to dispose of it now. So that's why I have the question mark there. So in the earlier slide, you saw something said EBCT. So it's an empty bed contact time. So this kind of explains mathematically what that means. So in the empty bed method, if you had a flow rate of 500 gallons per minute, it equals 67 cubic feet per minute. So you would assume the flow rate through that cubic feet foot of volume would be 5 minutes of contact time for that particular media bed, right? So, and the media bed volume calculation is used next to it. So it's important to understand that the filters, these particular type of filters in this process are designed for certain flow rates, and which we discussed earlier. So this actually gives you a visual representation of what that empty bed contact time is. And that is designed to make sure that the amount of flow going through your media, actually the water spends enough time in that media to have a chance to adsorb to the outside of any of the media grains. So more math stuff and scientific notation here. So total flow treated, okay, feet to the third power or cubic footage before exhaustion divided by your medium volume. So what this is trying to tell you, once you've calculated your media absorption exhaustion, so how much that media can take up, you can figure that out mathematically. So for example, assume media volume of 200 cubic feet and a 50,000 bed volumes treated. And you can do the math along with me. And if you want to do more of this, you can come to my math class in early June. We won't go through the whole thing, but it tells you exactly how much water could be treated for this particular media before you had to throw it away. So these are important things if you're using the absorptive method to understand. And this could apply also to any type of conventional treatment. These are factors. Surface area in general, larger surface area will result in higher absorption capacity. Well, no, that's a no-brainer, right? Influent concentration, higher influent absorptive concentration may result in higher absorptive capacity due to the concentration gradients in the aqueous surface. Wow, that's even over my head. But the influent concentration of your arsenic is going to have a issue, is going to be a factor in the absorption. The more arsenic that you would have coming in, the quicker that media is going to be used up. Changes in pH may affect the charge of the adsorbent or absorbate, increasing or decreasing absorption capacity. Like most things in the water treatment world, coagulation, sedimentation, those electrochemical forces that drive that are influenced by pH and alkalinity. So if the pH is higher or lower than the filter, the throwaway media that may be chosen is used to or works best in, it could have an effect. Competing absorbents of non-selective other elements in influent water may also be absorbed, decreasing the capacity of absorbate of interest. In most cases, we're talking about iron and manganese because they have similar properties to the arsenic. So That could be and will be a competing absorbent for your filter media. Increasing contact time, increased capacity, or run time to breakpoint. So that's typical filter speak. More stringent, the MCL, decreased capacity of runtime to breakpoint. So if the MCL lowers, that could be an issue for the type of media you're using or the size and shapes of your filters. Here's some different type of arsenic absorption medias that are out there. Typically, they're replaced medias and they're disposable. I know there is some now that they can essentially recharge. They're generally made up of non-hazardous material that I've seen them made of organic and inorganic materials. They can extend the bed life depending on the chemistry of the media itself. Backwash is required only to restabilize the bed. So what backwashing would accomplish is it would straighten the media grains in the particular bed. Backwash is non-hazardous, usually looped back to the system, allowing very minimal amounts of sludge disposal. Hopefully, the facility would be set up that way. Again, with this type of treatment, the arsenic that is being removed is of a less hazardous state than some of the other states arsenic could be found in. So here's some different types of absorptive medias that are out there, and there's more than this now. This was created several years ago. So different types of activating aluminum, titanium oxide, and there's a trade name for it. Iron-based medias, so iron-doped activated alumina, granule ferric oxide hydroxide, other iron-based medias, GFH, and in our room, somebody's probably using some of these already. So these are just some of the trade and brand names for absorptive medias that are out on the market. And again, there's more medias than that right now. So in these particular cases, we're talking about single pass disposable. The surface area, again, with filtration, there's always a theoretical surface area that things are going to work best in. For these particular iron-based medias, that's where it works. The theoretical capacity under ideal conditions, there you go. Another scientific notation that everybody loves to read. Here are some factors for absorption. And again, earlier in the presentation, we saw a chart about pH ranges, different other competing ions like phosphate, silica, sulfate, nitrate. So if the pH isn't in that particular range, it could affect how well the absorptive qualities of the filter media would work. And again, phosphates and silicas and sulfates and nitrates and things like that also can compete with the absorptive characteristics of the media. So if you have waters that have that type of issue, that might using this type of treatment particularly may not be as effective as some of the other ones. Here's some cost type things with this, and these numbers are probably could be higher or lower because again, this presentation is not brand spanking new. So with anything in our field, you're going to have a capital cost for startup, and it could be different depending on which media that you choose. Typically 2 beds in series, the maximum capacity of a lead bed. In our world, we generally have redundancy, if nothing else, so that you can do maintenance on one or the other. So generally speaking, you would have 2 beds or more, but you would always want redundancy. Operating costs may differ significantly, and here's different cost of media. And I don't know if that 50 cents to $5 per pound is still the right range. I have a feeling it's probably not. I have a feeling it may be a little higher than that at this time. Cost of lowering pH must be weighed against capacity increase. So if you have to lower the pH to bring it in range of the media you're using, you have to use an additional chemical to do that. Is that going to be too costly to use this particular method? And again, new medias will be developed, and they are being developed, and could be used to replace original media. Prices should eventually drop. I don't know if some of you have been purchasing this. Just drop me a message and let me know, and I'll tell the class whether those prices have started to drop or not. I have a feeling that they probably have not. So here is the here's just an overall graph of the effluent arsenic levels based on the bed volumes that that your treatment would flow through. So you can just take a rough look at that. So the blue line is if you can't see it, it is an influent of 30 parts per billion. The green line would be a 50 part per billion, and the red line is a 70 part per billion. So you can see the different bed volumes that would be needed if you had those levels of arsenic as your influent water. And again, you folks, when you get the copy of this presentation, you can go back and look at these charts and slow down the video and do whatever you need if you're interested in this. So here's an effect of I just talked about the effects of influent pH and how they could affect the treatment, the overall effluent. So there again, you have the effluent arsenic is on the left, and the bottom of this one is the bed volumes times 1,000. So I'm not going to go ahead and explain, but you can see the different pH variants that go with that, and you can see if you're not in that range, that sweet zone, that you might not get as much of the effluent arsenic removal as you want. I don't know if folks can really see this chart very well. I'm hoping you can. Again, you can look at these on your own. So this one again is going to talk about, this is actually some of the physical makeup of what one of these filters would look like. And again, a lot of these are made out of metals and steels. I've seen some of them look like a fiberglass material. Maybe it's a carbon material. I don't know. You'll see some in the video that we'll show shortly. So this is just a kind of a makeup of this particular type of EBCT. So for this one, the media volume is 27,000 pounds. It shows you the flow rate, backwash rate, backwash frequency, and the optimum pH levels. So just a kind of a diagram of the different mechanical processes and a different inside look of what one of these filters may look like. All right, the next one is the resin medias. These are different type of media, coated media, that can be used for this type of removal, for the arsenic removal. Spherical beads that have a homogeneous flow, which means there's going to be there's going to be the annual spaces between the beads are going to be consistent, unlike standard sand filter media, where the sand grains are of different shapes and different sizes. These spherical type beads, the annular spaces between them be almost identical, which could be important in the removal of this. So if you have a non-spherical or sand-based type, you could have some turbulence issues, which it could possibly cause some short-circuiting issues. But the particle size uniformity needs to be able to control the pathway of the flow through it, which means there'll be more contact with the resins as they go through, more contact with that media, more of a chance for a particle to adhere to it. So that's one of the advantages of using these resin spherical type medias. You get less loss through washing because of the inherent shape and density of these medias. Less channeling, which means simply that because of their shape and the way that they form together, there's less of an issue with the channel opening up in your filter. Like in old school filter terminology, you wouldn't have a boil in those filters. Less back pressure. I don't know if that's always true when you'd have less back pressure during the backwash, but it may be because of the consistent size that the bed rise would be a little bit easier. But again, I'm not sure that that's always the case with these types of resin medias. Here's just a basic illustration of what one of these resin medias may look like inside, and there's different ones out on the market. So you can see the kind of the internal makeup and how the system, how the different ones are charged. So for these sphericals, they have better cross strength, better but because of their shape and their material, the porosity is controlled, so the inclusions are filled. So so you can just read down the list of the handling and the regenerations and things like that. In this particular case, it would be the iron oxide type coating. Dynamic flow through the bed enhances iron accessibility, which is true because of the inherent shape of these items. There's a lot of adhesive surfaces to the top, or to the entire piece of media, and the annual will flow through there. There's more of a chance for a particle to adhere to it. And here are some lab results with 3 different types of filter media, coated filter media resins. And you can see the results. And I'm sure when I look at this that the company put this slide together probably may sell this bottom one. I'm not sure. It probably does. But anyway, so that's just a visual representation of some different types of lab results. Now, here's another one that's similar, and this is from a pilot plant out in Tucson, Arizona. Another one from the same one. So here's some differences in between a couple different ones. And I'm not going to. It's just not a sales pitch. I'm sure this company Lane probably created this slide, but just some comparisons between replacement media and some regenerative media. So, and this could apply to any type of regenerated media. You can see the costs and things associated with being able to regenerate a media as opposed to replacing it completely, and what that cost could be over time. I'll just skip through these quickly because I know they're going to be hard to see anyway. One of the things with these resins is certain ones of them can be regenerated, which is good, not all throw away. So with the regeneration, these are some of the things that go along with this. So I'm not going to go through each and every one of these bullet points with you, but there's some benefits for regenerative medias rather than the throwaway medias. The last category that mitigates liability of on-site and off-site residuals. That's a pretty big deal, because in this particular case, you're not throwing these medias away, so you don't have to landfill them. Potentially put those in hazardous waste landfills. Operating costs are going to be key to any one of the choices of resin type medias. So for this, less media lowers capital costs. Well, that's pretty obvious. Less media reduces column size. So the footprint that you would have to have if you built a new facility, or if you were retrofitting an old facility, less volume lowers the volume of landfill disposal. The regenerated media lowers your operating costs because you're not continually buying new media. No backwash lowers the site residuals cost. Well, that's obvious because you're not constantly dealing with that sludge concern. No backwash reduces operation complexity. No backwash reduces volume of wasted water. So here's a disposable media approach instead of using the regenerative type medias. So in this disposable media approach, you can see it's got the lead lag type of media, and I don't know how well you can see the upper or the right hand side, one of the pictures on the top, but with this particular disposable media approach, you always have 2 on board. So if you had to dispose of one of the medias, you have the other one able to operate. And the little inset on the top right hand side is supposed to be a video. It's supposed to be a little video I can click on, but using WebEx, I can't do that to show you how that video works. Pilot testing with any of these processes has been key in the past, and I'm sure if you're building a new facility, Pilot testing will be key in the future for them. So there's some different pilot tests that are out on the market, and these are some of the things that people evaluate to be able to build a full-scale plan over, right? So you determine what the optimum bed size is, your media life, your best adjustments for pH, your backwash frequency if you're not using throwaway media. Other issues, the effluent water quality, how much iron's getting passed through, and that can be a really big issue. Having that, using iron-based coagulants and things like that can cause aesthetic issues in your distribution system. And again, any of these pilot tests will help you understand the amounts of waste disposal you may have as a result of the treatment process. So just here's a basic diagram of one of those, of mechanically what one of these types of filters would look like. So this would be ultimate. This one have multiple iron-based medias. This is just one of a couple different filters. I'll just take a quick look at it, just how it's plumbed. So here's some performance data to look at for a particular model. In this model, the arsenic concentration range was between 10 and 50. The species will be removed as arsenic 3 and 5, and with this particular treatment, it greater efficiency with the 5 species. Removal efficiency less or 90% typical, pH sensitive, pretty much what we have talked about earlier. What media life expectancy, I like that they said 1 year to several years. So, yeah, I guess that's true. Pre-chlorination of oxidation, conversion of the A3 to 5 for improves performance, but not essential for some required for arsenic reduction point or POE application. So, again, if you went to a combination of point of entry devices or point of use devices, you may not have to do the full conversion over to the less dynamic form of arsenic. Kinetics, very rapid removal of arsenic in seconds to minutes. Disposal, it talks about how you would dispose it, and there's some guidelines in EPA that'll help you with that. Adaptability media can be used as conventional cartridges, filters, or point of entry tanks, and anything in water world has to have an NSF approval number. So this one is NSF 61. We're almost at a break, guys. Almost here at the end of this absorptive one. Absorptive advantages, and I'm not going to read every one of those. You can read through those. We talked kind of about this at the beginning, this pump and treat thing. So you can get high rates with minimal real estate. You can retrofit. Capital costs are lower, possibly lower. I'm not going to say they are lower. Equipment costs could possibly be lower. Technology is ideally suited to stop and start wellhead operation. Systems can be located outdoors in areas where freezing potential is less consideration. Treatment equipment can be pre-assembled and shipped, and there are a lot of skid-mounted. For most of the ones I've seen in our state, a lot of the stuff came in skid-mounted, ready to go. Systems can be relocated to other facilities, which is a bonus as well. So here's the summary, and then we'll take a break. In summary, absorption type things, so less economical at higher concentrations of arsenic, and the pH in the higher alkaline numbers, so above 7. Pre and post pH adjustment could be required if it's not in the proper range. Pre-oxidation conversion of arsenite to arsenate recommended, particularly if you don't have a point of use or point of entry treatment devices in your system. Interfering ions, we talked about that, things that can interfere with the absorptive qualities of the media. Easiest to operate, low skill sets, and I don't mean to be insulting to operators, just mean that you're using your existing skill sets. Front end pre-filter and backwash water recovery reuse system recommended, and pretty much most systems are using recovery and reuse systems anyway. Require solid waste disposal, media replacement, and again, with the media replacement and disposal, you could have landfill issues associated with that. All right. It is, what time is it, folks? It is 11 o'clock. Let's take a quick 10-minute break. We'll meet back at 11:10. And what I'll do is I'm going to show you a brief video, and then we'll resume our slide deck presentation. So get up, stretch, unwind, and I will see you back here in 10 minutes. Welcome back, folks. In a second, I'm going to put a link in the bottom right-hand side of your screen from one of the EPA videos I was telling you about earlier. That dealt specifically with the treatment method that we just talked about. All right, I hope everybody was able to play the link through. That was just some EPA videos, some testing facilities that they've used. They've done a lot of piloting, particularly out in the southwestern area of the country, where the issues with not only arsenic, but things like uranium and that type of stuff occurs that need to be treated for. In fact, the next little segment we're going to talk about on the PowerPoint deck is some pre-engineered systems that were initially designed for uranium removal, but were found to be effective for arsenic removal as well. So, bring my deck back up. All right, so talk a little bit about some pre-engineered system. Again, could be used for either arsenic or uranium removal. And these different systems range in size. The ones we're particularly going to look at range from 50 gallons per minute to 1,000 gallons per minute. Skid-based things that can be easily brought in and set up at a facility. So here we go. Designed, like any of these skid-based process, designed to be simple, affordable for removal for small municipal and institutional water treatment market segment. And there's just some design features. Have dual column design for lead, lag, or parallel flow. To have testing, full analytical testing designed into them. Low maintenance, high performance systems, cradle to grave, toxin management. What that means is part of the engineering would be you partner with the engineer for the placement of the media, so you don't have to worry about the getting rid of any of the treated materials such as arsenic or in some cases uranium for these things. Media regeneration option to reduce operating costs. Usually have full technical support. A lot of times these things are in direct connect through computer systems with the engineering firms where they can monitor them remotely. Modular design provides for maximum flexibility, so you can add on to these systems if they're working better, or if you need to have more flow. So here's just, I'm not going to spend too much time on each one of these, but just to give you some examples of different sized units. This one's 100 gallon per minute. You can see that these are all going to have a minimum of 2 different tanks. So there's the front view of it, the mechanical guidelines of it. Got metering gauges, typical stuff that you would find on any type of filter. Here's the 200 gallon a minute systems. It's just 2 100 gallon systems put together. Elevation picture so you can get an idea of understanding how large the systems would be. And they get larger, 5, 750, and 1,000. So the tankage gets larger. So it comes with testing type programs as well. They would come and do periodical testing for the removal rates and that type of stuff. So these testing programs are going to help you ensure maximum use of your resin, ensure maximum quality of drinking water, and also provide you with history of how your treatment process is working. And they can also be designed for notification through SCADAs or PLC type notifications. This is when this program first came out. This was one of the key selling points for these types of package systems. Somebody else was going to deal with the hazardous waste, particularly when the bottom paragraph talks about uranium, because that's even more heavily regulated than arsenic. So here's just a summary of these types of systems: high quality, low cost operation, the full testing, the no issue with the residuals, multiple contaminant removal, so they could remove uranium with arsenic, all different types of things. Cradle to grave on the media, lead lag designs, all those types of things. So they go along with these pre-engineered systems. The next the next type of treatment we're going to talk about is the ion exchange type of treatment. There's some places in Maryland that are using ion exchange as their way of treating for arsenic. Again, not advertising for Maine Atlantic, but they've supplied a lot of these slides so you can see their tags on one of my slides here. All right, much like the conventional treatment method using the absorptive filtration or whatever, some of the elements treated by ion exchange, other than arsenic, right? Hardness, nitrates, radium, barium, iron, those types of things have been used for years, and ion exchange has been used for a very long time to deal with these types of issues, but they have advantages for other types of contaminants that you may have in your source water. So ion exchange is going to use a strong base of anion exchange resin. Be regenerated. It can be regenerated using concentrated chloride or salt brine. Some of the brine can be recycled. Sometimes they can't, but they're designed for some of them to be recycled. Arsenic removed from brine by precipitation with iron coagulant. So kind of works in the electrochemical aspect, like conventional with this one. The solids are thickened, dewatered, and disposed of, and the supernatant can be disposed of as well. So if we're talking about it, sorry about the cough, guys. We're talking about ion exchange for arsenic in particular, an arsenic ion exchange for chloride ion held on the resin. So it's essentially adhering to a chloride particle. The bed may be backwash, remove those particles and reduce head loss. So very typical filtration type things. When we talk about the ion exchange, we're exchanging the arsenic ion for an ion of the salt. So during regeneration with the salt solution, the arsenic ion is stripped from the resin and replaced by the chloride. Following regeneration, the bed is rinsed to remove the waste salts from the regenerated resin. So typical filter type things. You see a lot of these types of ion exchanges in private well systems all over the state. So some of these private type ion exchange systems also can remove arsenic, and they can be a point of use. Can be used as a point of use treatment device as well. For systems, small or large systems that decided to do a point of use treatment system instead of a full-blown treatment system at the plant, or a combination of plant removal with ion exchange removal as a point of use or point of entry device. So, like any other treatment process that are out there, there's some important things to be under consideration here. Pre-treatment, if the influent waters are not within the parameters that the ion exchange works best for, you may require some pre-treatment. Again, empty bed contact time, so it has to have a certain amount of time for the arsenic particles to exchange for the salt-based particles. The time of media exhaustion, how long before you're going to have to regenerate your bed, the amount of brine and whether it needs to be replaced, and of course, your water quality analysis is always important. Bear with me one second, folks. I'm having stop my presentation for a second and reload it because it locked up on me. So here's a basic line diagram drawing of an ion exchange concept, and this doesn't just have to be for arsenic removal. This could be for any other type of removal. Particle that could do an ion exchange could be used. You could use the same system for treatment, and again, lots of homes with wells have these types of systems. So you can see your feed water coming in. It's got the backwash, the regenerate, where your regenerate goes, all the different plumbing lines for plumbing and things like that to go along with it. So this next one's has the different types of the different selectivity of ions on the type of resins you may want to use in the ion exchange. So for sulfate, arsenate as 5, nitrate, arsenate is A3, chloride, and bicarbonate. So for your water quality portion, sulfate is the most preferred. Sulfate impacts the run length. Potential for chromatographic peaking, and I'll talk about that more later. Treated water concentration greater than raw. Arsenic and nitrate not applicable for total dissolved solids of under 500 milligrams per liter, or sulfate for under 150 milligrams per liter. So these are just things that have to be analyzed before you would decide which type of ion type you would choose for the ion exchange. Here's one for bed volume over top of sulfates. You can see the sloping number as it applies to the milligrams per liter of sulfate that would be system. So pre-treatment tells you what your feed water needs to be. This is the range it's looking for with chlorine, with the total contaminant load coming in and NTUs, and with your iron level. Also talks about the dechlorination component if you need to do that. You could use bisulfate or GAC. A lot of plants use GAC now. And then the pre-filtration phase of an ion exchange system. Regeneration frequency determines the volume and the quality of the wastewater, obviously, and can be predictable based on water quality. Again, these are used typically for well systems, and well water quality does not change significantly over time. Specifically, your well water, if your well is tapped into some of the lower aquifers, it changes probably not at all over 20-year periods. There is a potential to reuse the brine. Concentration of arsenic may present permitting issues, and that's always an issue with this type of treatment. Is what do you do with the after effect? What do you do with that arsenic when it's the arsenic resin that's left over? So this one talks about the regenerate treatment. Arsenic separated from regeneration, neutralized with acid. Precipitation of arsenic in regeneration. So in this particular case, they're thickening the solids, and spent regenerate may be hazardous, and it probably will be hazardous. You may have an issue with what you can do with that hazardous material if it is hazardous. So here you go. Parameters for designing these types of facilities. How often you have to regenerate, right? What the bed volume, how much bed volume is treated. It's depending on other ions that may come into play with your source water, sulfate, nitrates, arsenic as well. Pre-treatment requirements, low turbidity and iron. Waste disposal, always a consideration what you're going to do with them. Can you dispose it to your sewer system? Can you use drying beds? Can you reuse your brine? All considerations when designing this type of treatment facility. So here's the difference between what you would do for a small system and a larger system for your design phase. So you can, as you follow down, you can see for a smaller system, you may go with a single vessel, although it probably would not be recommended. Large would have multiple or parallel vessels, right? So the regeneration times and things like that are all different based on whether your system is large or small. And some of the issues with the larger systems, you may not be cost effective without simple brine or line disposal. So all these things come into play, whether you're designing it for a small, say, home system or a small, tiny town system, or whether you're designing it for a larger municipal type situation. So here you go. There's some typical parameters for this type of treatment. So for the column design inside of the brine vats and things like that. So if you look at it, talks about the parameters down the left-hand column. We're not going to go over each one of those, but it has the values that they're looking for each one of these. So all these factors go into play in designing whether it's a large or small system. So again, later on, if you are interested in this type of information, it'll come in a couple days, you'll get the video of this. You'll be able to look at it again. The design of this particular type of system, it's designed based on the empty bed contact time, much like when we talked about it in the filtration part earlier. Quantity of media, size of columns, flow rates, flow designs, right? Specific testing of the water. So when they're designing this, the source water would be tested. What type of regenerant or salt you're going to use, how you're going to detox your brine, what you're going to do with that, right? So, and there's some other chemicals that could affect that detox as well. Which one of those can be used, how much will be needed, all part of the design concept and determining whether or not to use the ion exchange method. Again, this can be a big issue, and it's going to be a bigger issue as time goes by, what to do with the brine. So there's some suggested things down at the bottom. Potential RCRE issues. RCRE is what governs the disposal for these types of items. So there's a limit for the arsenic in wastewater. So you can't have over 5 milligrams per liter. If you do, you probably cannot use the wastewater. You probably could not dispose of it directly to your wastewater facilities. So just things to keep in mind for the brine disposal. And it can be costly, particularly if you're over that 5 milligrams per liter. You're not going to be able to use the sewer. You're probably going to have to charge. They're probably going to get charged a little bit, or not even a little bit more. You're probably going to get charged significantly more to get rid of that brine. Some type of secured landfill situation. So here's this is a layout of one of these systems. In this particular, it is a Vineland system. It was one of the larger systems that was implemented, but you can see the layout. And again, people with small phones, my apologies. It's even hard for me. I have a large screen to see exactly how the floor plan is laid out, but you can see that this particular concept, it has the tanks, the brine tanks, the regeneration, how the plumbing's laid out in parallel. They're connected. Everything's connected together. So just a little layout schematic for you. Here's a picture of what it actually looks like in the real world. It looks just like a filtered gallery, right? So they're ion exchange units instead of filtration units. So many of these things have been pilot tested. Again, it's always a good idea to have a pilot test done for a facility before you determine what type of treatment process you're going to use, or if you're using ion exchange, you can determine how often you're going to regenerate the brine, how much wastewater you're going to have, how long you can run the facility without having to backwash the things. And you can also investigate blending of waters of two different qualities, water with a higher arsenic blended in with water of lower arsenic, and see how that reacts inside of the ion exchange tanks, and whether that gives you longer run times or not. So in summary, in summary, you can see ion exchange influence levels not critical good for very high as um, arsenic as high as 160 parts per billion. There's your pH range. So each one of these different treatment aspects is going to have ranges of pH and things. If your source water isn't in that range, there's always chemical additives you can do to make it in that range. In this particular case, pre-oxidation of arsenic is required because you have to change its state for these ions to work correctly. Requires low chlorine residual. Okay, so typically you would not chlorinate this. If your water is chlorinated, you'd have to dechlorinate before it gets into the tanks. Not recommended sulfate levels are high, nitrates high, total dissolved solids over 500 parts per million, because it'd be way too much of a load on your brine. Other contaminants would exhaust your brine. The arsenic removal may not be as complete. Requires brine minimization and disposal. Again, disposal with all these different concepts is going to be an issue. It says complex operation, high skill sets. I don't often believe that. I think that we don't always give credit, as much credit to operators as you folks deserve. It's a little more complex in that it has some more working electrical parts and things like that, but it's not too complex to be a requirement as to whether you're going to use it or not when you're investigating it. The residuals issues, of course, could be problematic and probably will be problematic if this is the route that you've selected. So there's just a rough summary, and there's other things in here that I didn't list, but they do have reliable performance. These ion exchange units have been used for many decades. Good for low treated arsenic complex. They do have a complex design, but I don't think it's that complex. It's almost a conventional system with just a couple added different technologies. Cost-effective removal with the brine solution, and depending on how high your removal rates are, it's a possibility that you could waste to your sewer. It may not be as cost effective if you have higher levels of sulfates and things like that because of the way it exhausts the brine. May not be cost effective without brine line disposal, and that's correct because you may have to landfill at that point. And you must operate to avoid hazardous waste. All right, so let's see. What time is it here? It's 11:40. I'm going to put another video in that deals with the ion exchange process. Get the link to that video for you. And this will deal specifically with what we just talked about with the ion exchange. This video is going to be about 10 minutes. Hopefully everybody got through that short video. Continue on our PowerPoint presentation. Just a word of note, I'm going to break at 12:30. I'll give you a 20-minute break then so you folks can grab something to eat real quick. Back, and we're well more than halfway over already, but I know some of you folks have blood sugar levels are probably getting low. So again, I'll break at it for 20 minutes, probably right around 12:30, and then once we come back, we won't have too many more slides to go through. I'm going to bring back up the PowerPoint deck. All right. I'm going to talk about some other treatment methods that are out there. In particular, we're going to talk about a little bit about lime softening, and we'll talk a little bit about membrane type filters. The first one we'll talk about is lime softening. It's a potential treatment process to remove arsenic. And I know it's something that's used. I'm not sure if it's used in Maryland. Maybe somebody that's listening can tell me whether they use it or not. But I've seen some of these in Delaware. Here's some examples of some things that lime softening can precipitate. And there's arsenic. You can see arsenic in the mix there. Iron, calcium carbonate, manganese, those types of things, and the amounts that it can be removed. And there's some comments about those removal rates, what it needs to have or what interferes with the removal rates. So here's a little graph about iron addition during the softening. So again, iron's a component and in binding the arsenic and changing its state. So arsenic removal and lime softening. Limiting factor, arsenic-free in raw water. If it's a limiting factor, you can increase the oxidation using other sources of oxidation. Insufficient removal by calcium carbonate precipitant. Add iron. Iron also is a great binding agent again for arsenic. Magnesium hydroxide not formed. You could increase the pH, and that's some pretty high pHs, but again, we're talking about lime softening, so we're dealing with a little bit higher pHs than what we normally would. So the next thing we'll talk about, and it's pretty, and I know I saved it here for last, but this is more, membranes are becoming more and more the typical go-to treatment item in Maryland, not just for water, but also for wastewater. They have a number of advantages. And they do have some disadvantages, treating not just arsenic, but other types of contaminants, radionuclides, things like that, that the membranes are used for, or in the wastewater field, trying to meet some of the new EPA guidelines for contaminants that get released back into our tributaries. So there's different types of membranes. I know people, when they think about membranes, their mind goes right to reverse osmosis, but that's just one type of membrane filtration. Reverse osmosis can actually be broken down into two separate categories. There's an RO. When I say RO, I mean reverse osmosis. There's an RO for salt water. So it'd be like treating seawater. There's an RO for brackish water. It'd be like treating Chesapeake Bay water. So those, and the reverse osmosis has the smallest size, pore size of membrane filter. And as we go down the deck here, nanofiltration, ultrafiltration, microfiltration, the sizes, the porous size gets higher as we go down the deck here. So you can see what each one of those has a potential to remove. You get up to the microfiltration ones, you may not be able to remove the arsenic particles themselves, but you could use it in combination with other arsenic treatment methods and then kind of use the microfilter as a polishing device. As in surface water, it varies widely in size. Surface water particles range widely in size. For arsenic particles, those are the sizes. And if you're interested in knowing what a Dalton is, you can look that up yourself. Groundwater is predominantly less than 3 Daltons in size. So the size of that arsenic particle will kind of dictate which size pore membrane you're going to need for your treatment. So just a brief schematic. You can see the reverse osmosis, again, the tiny pores. The pores are small enough where they will not allow arsenic-3 or arsenic-5 in at all. Right? Nanofiltration, ultrafiltration, which is that middle line. Arsenic-3 can go in, but arsenic-5 gets filtered out. Then get down to microfiltration. You get some pass-through of some of the arsenics, but your flocks and things like that can't pass through that. So, and what you would use that for is in combination with your conventional type arsenic removal systems using iron-based coagulants and doing the sedimentation of the iron arsenic bonded. So if you're using that type of treatment ahead of it, ultrafiltration or microfiltration could be used. If you're not using that type of treatment ahead of it, the other types of nanofiltration, the RO, may be what's used. Again, there's higher costs associated with running these types of filters or pressure type filters. The pore sizes are tiny. You need a lot of pressure, mechanical, electrical force to push the water through these pores. On top of that, the way these systems are designed, you lose some of your capacity, your gallon per minute capacity, because you have to constantly pull water off in what's called a flux to get rid of the things that are getting caught by the outside of your membranes. Next slide kind of has the composition of the water composition and its influence of arsenic removal. So you can go down the column for the RO, nanofiltration, ultrafiltration. See the removal type qualities of this, how it can be removed, how much, that type of stuff. And then to the right, you can see the different characteristics that come into play with the removal of arsenic 5. So here's a study of RO nanofiltration, ultrafiltration performances. I'm not going to go into details, but you can see the test results for removal rates for arsenic 5 and arsenic 3. And you can see the top, the groundwater versus surface water tests as well. See the removal rates and how effective the removal rate is. And you can see the smaller the pore size, obviously the more of all the substances are going to be removed. So, whichever method of treatment you've chosen, whether it's membrane filtration or conventional or some type of ion exchange or lime softening, whichever you've chosen, you may have to deal with this next thing we're going to talk about, which is the waste management issues associated with this type of with these types of treatment for arsenic. And again, arsenic, and I started off the presentation by showing you a video of health effects as it applied to Elizabeth, or as it applied to Victorian England. So realizing, of course, that there are some health effects of arsenic, obviously. What you do with the treated arsenic, you've bound it, you've filtered it, whatever you've done with it, you have to do something with it to make sure that it is placed in or it's made safe or placed somewhere where it can be safely disposed of. Bear with me again, folks. My deck just froze up again, so go out and then back in again. There we go. So, with any type of hazardous contamination, you realize there's going to be not only federal regulations, but local and state regulations that apply. Each state can, they can't have a rate of under what the EPA standard is, but they can't be over what the EPA standard is, sorry about that, but they can apply standards, lesser standards, which means the amount that you discharge, they may decide that it's a greater hazard and they won't allow you to discharge or the amount that EPA says you can, right? So you have to take in mind your local and state regulations. California, Western Rocky Mountain state regs differ as compared to eastern and middle portions of the U.S. And again, out that way, California and the Southwest and things, they have all kinds of happy little things they're treating for, like uranium and arsenic. Lots of issues around in and around mining areas and areas that had previously been mined that they deal with all the time. Get plant location. Where's the plant at? Your available land, those types of things where you can have evaporation for your brines and things. is disposal of brine wastewater to is it right to your wastewater plant or not? Is it possible or permissible? Are the levels too high? Will the wastewater folks accept it? There's lots of different things that come into play. Um, is the cost of transporting the brine tenable? Can you actually afford to do that? Right. So that cost may dictate which particular form of treatment you decide to use. Institute of backwash water recovery and reuse of solid settling. That could be something that you could try to kind of mitigate some of these things. So RCRA, when you hear me say that coming up, it's Resource Conservation Recovery Act. It's a national act that deals with toxic type chemicals and metals. So toxicity characteristics, leaching potential, things like that. And arsenics and brines and things like that do have a leaching potential. Technically based on local limits, ion exchange and active aluminum, coagulation, there's all kinds of different issues with the technology that's available now to treat for arsenic. Again, you have an opportunity to check on the EPA standards. You could check on the Maryland State, the MDE sites about the standards for arsenic solids handling, things like that. So this first bullet on this is important, and it is critical to understand when that contaminant becomes a waste defined under RCRA. So when a material is no longer used in the treatment process, it is then considered a waste. So that's just a rule of thumb when it comes to these residual issues. Waste solutions generated by various treatment processes, such as the 9 and the AA, will be defined as waste. They are no longer in the treatment process. So again, it's kind of very similar to the second bullet, but it's also gives a little more clarification to what that second bullet really means. When the waste solution has an arsenic concentration greater than 5 milligrams per liter, it will be defined as hazardous waste, because at that 5 milligrams per liter limit is where you start to have some health effects of arsenic. Precipitation of arsenic by such methods as ferric chloride addition, pH reduction constitute the treatment of hazardous waste. So even when you're after you've treated for the arsenic itself, if you were treating the what you've removed, the solids you've removed, also it would be considered a hazardous waste. So the treatment process used for that, if you're regenerating brine and things like that, could be considered hazardous as well. But the recycled brine is not a waste until it is no longer usable. So once you've used up the brine, or the usable brine, it then becomes a waste. So there was a bunch of loopholes associated with the RCRA initially that have been filled in over time. Environmentally acceptable waste handling disposal practices are essential to comply with the arsenic MCL of 10 parts per billion. So there's a lot of innovation and technology out there on how to do that, but it is becoming increasingly harder to find landed applications for some of these wastes. Arsenic removal technologies remove between 80 and 90% or 95% of arsenic from water. Well, hopefully it does. In order to get it into the levels that we can send it to our customers, it should. So when you're removing that type of percentage from your water stream, you can get high concentrations in your sludge and things like that. So these highly concentrated sludges can potentially be considered toxic wastes. The greater recovery rate of the treatment process, the greater potential hazard and residual stream. So the more and more you concentrate your residuals by reuse and things like that, or you cover and reuse some of those things, the more you can potentially concentrate your arsenic waste, and the higher hazard it could become. So here's the permitting information from the RCRA. On-site treatment of hazardous waste to render them non-toxic could require a treatment, storage, and disposal facility. So if you see a TSDF, that's what that means. Compliance, record keeping, like anything else, it's a federal requirement. You have to keep records, whether it's safety, EPA standards, things like that, always come with record keeping. Facility construction maintenance requirements would also apply. just like OSHA rules, things like that, always have some types of requirements like that. Challenging scenario for typical drinking water facility due to the liability of public perception issues. And that is an issue. I know we're having issues on the Eastern Shore now with the perception of arsenic treatment. And it's not because we're not treating the arsenic properly in some aspects, it's because of some of the residual issues that the treatment itself causes. For instance, iron colored water and things because of the treatment processes used. That usually kicks off a round of what are we sending out the door? And as soon as people realize, when they actually look at their CCR, they realize that maybe we're treating for arsenic, then they all of a sudden that red water they see, even though it may not have any arsenic at all, now becomes an issue. You're trying to kill me. So those scenarios do occur, and public perception is driven by that type of perception. And again, if people took the time to read their consumer confidence reports, they would understand. Chances are, 99.99 times out of 100, right? We're not violating our MDE or EPA regs because we can't. And if we do, they have to be notified right away. But people, they get panicked. They don't really understand that. Again, another option is off-site storage. Become costly. Again, our wastewater folks can tell us that the landed use for your wastewater sludge is now a big issue all over the country. This is a cost prohibitive item. Most instances, environmentally unacceptable in some areas, right? A primary arsenic removal process that minimizes or eliminates the generation of hazardous waste are preferable from an implementation standpoint. And that's true. If you can use a process that doesn't create the type of hazardous waste that some of those processes do, you're probably going to minimize a lot of these paperwork requirements, CCR requirements, things like that. So provided you have a low enough arsenic concentration in your source water, you can use like the conventional types of treatment. You're not producing those high levels of possible toxic sludge and things like that. So this chart is going to tell you the different types of sludges and things that are generated by different types of treatment processes, concentrations, how concentrated these things can become, break them down into pounds and everything else. You don't have to look at every column, but it starts with conventional treatment, salt water softening ion exchange. It goes down from brine recycling, regeneration, filtration. So if you get a chance to on the recording, you can take a look at that. So with any other regulations, it's going to have an impact on your treatment process selection. So generally the most critical factor on treatment selection is generally cost, right? How much is this going to cost me? How much is it going to cost my taxpayers and or my customers? So RCRA 40 CFR parts, blah, 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 through blah, blah, blah. Again, waste is classified as hazard if it's toxic, corrosive, ignitable, reactive, or acutely hazardous, and arsenic can be one of those, right? Areas of concern for arsenic treatment include the backwash, the settled solids, and the brine. That 5 milligrams per liter is key, and that's currently the criteria for arsenic in waste streams, right? Either that has to be extracted or dissolved substance in solution below that concentration. Plan of TCLP of 1 milligram per liter in the future. So again, like anything else in our industry, you can count on the fact that treatment techniques get better as testing for these types of things gets better. Those numbers start to drop. So it could go from 5 to 1 in the future. Reg changes happen quite a bit. There's going to be a reg change this year. I have not looked at it closely enough to see if it does affect the arsenic levels. I'm not sure if that reg change affected the RCRA either. So I'll have to take a look at that. More impacts, dissolved criteria not even considered by industry until this past year. And when I mean by past year, this was several years ago. So So these different types of brines, total dissolved solids, low total solids, things like that all have those types of criteria for the dissolved types of arsenic products that needs to be resolved too. Solids residual is generally not a problem with respect to RCRA with the dewatered sludges or spent media, and that is still the same, but that could change as well when the reg changes. So for most of the 9 and AA facilities with on-site regeneration and less than 5 milligram arsenic, they will be large quantity of hazardous waste generators, and it gives you an estimate of what that could be. Approximately 300 gallons of on-site spent generation, right, at 99% water recovery. So it's just basic math here on how much your process could affect how much actual on-site arsenic you would have. So here's a brief summary. Several arsenic removal processes can generate waste. That's a given. It can impose significant regulatory burdens on your utility, and it will. Liquid residuals were regenerated or utilized have a significant potential to exceed that 5 milligrams per liter toxicity level, particularly if spent brine is recycled. So, and that's just trying to tell you, the more you concentrate substance, the greater shot you got of getting it above that 5 milligrams per liter toxicity level. The process of on-site regeneration, off-site disposal is cost prohibitive. Sewer disposal may not comply with TBLL to be exempt from the RCRA. So again, you have to have an understanding of what the waste system will accept, whether they're going to accept the hazardous waste or not, or whether you're below the hazardous waste levels. Hazardous waste treated on site with precipitative and pH adjustment process to render them non-toxic must comply with the stringent RCRA provisions. So if that's something you're doing on site, again, you'll have a number of provisions you have to meet for that treatment as well. And that's a separate form of treatment that will be covered by the RCRA. The 9 and AA water treatment facility would also be hazardous waste treatment facility due to on-site residuals handling processes. So your TSDF permit may not be required for those. So here you go, oxidation filtration with backwash, water recovery, and solid settling with throwaway absorptive media have reduced potential to generate those hazardous waste. So if that's the type of facility, if you're lucky enough to have an incoming water where this is the type of treatment process you can use, you're probably going to have you'll have a lower chance of having to of your solids reaching that toxicity level. So reduced potential to generate hazardous waste either in the liquid stream, dewater solids, or spent media. TCLP testing of spent media and dewatering solids is recommended to confirm these findings for site-specific applications. And that's a biggie. So you want to make sure that you don't want to assume that that it's the case. You want to make sure that but for testing, your findings are all in range to make sure you're not in that RCRA type area where you need to meet those guidelines for toxicity. So here is the processes with the least waste disposal concerns. Again, it's the oxidation, iron addition, absorption, filtration that we've talked about, and the absorption on iron-based media is another one. Again, those things, those two types of treatment, arsenic can be changed to non-hazardous materials and possibly be landfilled, but that's not always the case. You have to check with your landfill to make sure. So this is the key question for, and not anymore as much, but it was the key question when this presentation was put together. What's the best treatment method for your system? And as we've went along here today, we've talked about the different treatment options and things that you would choose when you determine which treatment option to use. So, but it's based on, again, cost and things like that. Here's just a general criteria. You base it on space available. Am I going to have to buy a ginormous piece of property and build a brand new plant to make this happen? Or can I retrofit an existing facility or property we already own to make this happen? Access to skilled operating personnel. And this is a real issue these days, particularly because in our industry, not just in the operation and maintenance of our industry, but in the engineering firms and everywhere else, there's a high amount of people retiring. So that people with skilled operate with licenses or skilled operators are not that easy to find anymore. So that could be an issue if you're starting out one of these new plants. Big issue, influent arsenic concentration. That's going to basically be a big driver in your selection, as well as the other things that may be in your raw water, like iron, silica, and phosphates. Some of those things are useful for the treatment of arsenic, and some of those things are not. The pH of your raw water, as we've seen with all the different treatment options, pH was one of those factors that had to be taken into account for in the different treatment options that you may choose. The wastewater disposal capacity, is there some way we can get rid of it? The waste to the wastewater plants or things like that. If not, how we're going to handle the waste from our treatment. System enclosure, because we may have some toxicity issues associated with this form of treatment. We have to make sure that we are enclosing these different tanks and things. We can't have people getting ill, right? Blending potential. I think that was on the first slide. Is there a way that we can blend our water so that we are within range without even having to treat for it? The wellhead operating factor, we talked about that earlier too. Is it a possibility that we can operate our wells differently? Can we get in a lower aquifer? Can we screen off some portion of the aquifer that has higher arsenic levels in it? So these are some factors. The cost considerations, capital cost, the operating cost. We've talked about all of these options will have some type of capital cost. Depending on which one you choose will dictate how high of a capital cost it will be. The operating cost, the cost of throwing away media or running membrane filters and things like that are going to be higher. I should require pilot testing to establish, but I've got May. And the reason I got May now is there's a lot of information out there about other utilities and their pilot tests. There's a lot of information about the arsenic levels in some of the main aquifers in Maryland, and the arsenic levels and things like that. So there's some really good information out there that we may not want to use a pilot test because some other nearby municipalities has pilot tested the process and they understand the dynamics of that aquifer. Regulatory requirements are always a consideration. Waste disposal, big consideration with these. So again, just to summarize what we've talked about here, the three primary treatment methods today: the co-precipitation, the absorption, the ion exchange. The best solution depends on the site, your water quality, waste disposal, and operational issues. So I'm going to summarize each one because it's been a while since we talked about a few. Absorption of arsenic onto iron or aluminum oxides. So minimizing the aluminum's solubility and particle remover is important. General model is useful, so modeling how that works is very useful. Likely only for existing plants. So if the plant already exists in that format, it's much easier to do than trying to retrofit some other one. Again, sludge disposal issue with that type of treatment. Precipitation, arsenic concentration is not as critical because you're precipitating it with other things such as iron and manganese. It does require that iron, however, whether you're getting it through your natural raw water or you're using a coagulant that's iron based. You dispose solids in backwash water. That's with any of these. But it could be the most complex to operate. For co-precipitation, there's advantages and disadvantages. It's proven it also leads to iron and manganese removal, which in the well water environment, that's a good thing. So the disadvantages with co-precipitation is numerous chemical feeds, somewhat complicated process, and you have to deal with wastewater discharge. The co-precipitation for the numerous chemicals, you probably, you'll remove a certain amount of alkalinity using these processes that you may need to add back in at the back side of the process, so you're not sending out aggressive water and things like that to your customers. So that there may be some additional chemicals that you have to use in this treatment model. So absorption, less economical at the high arsenic concentrations. There's lots of interfering ions that can affect it, such as silica, that will affect the media life because it will bind with that absorptive media. It's easiest to operate in that, you're just talking about adding some filters essentially to the process, or you may be retrofitting existing filters that you have into the process. It only requires solid waste disposal now because you're talking about sludge, probably iron and manganese associated with the arsenic as well. So here's your summary on that one. And the advantages and disadvantages. The advantages, of course, is simple to operate, no wastewater discharge, and could, I say may, simplify waste disposal. Again, if you're in an area where the rules are different, that may not be the case. Disadvantages of absorption is dependent on water quality. That's why lots of time the absorptive usage generally in the groundwater field, not a surface water type environment. May require pH adjustment, yes, if you need to get it in range to work well. You may have to trim it at the beginning, or you may have to adjust it at the end. Again, we can't be sending out aggressive water, so it could be an alkalinity. Interfering ions, the same kind of, the same thing. Those ions that can bind onto the absorptive materials can become an issue if they're in high enough amounts in your source water coming in. Ion exchange influent as levels not critical, or influent arsenic levels in this particular case are not critical. Not recommended if sulfate levels are high. Again, it'll bind with your brine and your ion exchange. Requires that brine discharge, which definitely is going to create an issue. Probably, well, I'm not saying, let me not say definitely, may definitely require some type of issue because of the hazardousness of that. There's some moderate operational issues with that, simply because it's a little more complicated. And again, you'll have to use, you don't have to, but you may use some additional chemicals for alkalinity and things like that. And there's a little bit more telemetry, computer control that goes along with the ion exchange systems than maybe conventional system would have. So here's your advantages and disadvantages with that. Ion exchange has been around forever. It is a proven technology. May only need to treat a portion of the flow. Yeah, if you've got a blended flow, different wells with different levels, it could be blended. So you may only be treating a portion of your total flow. Disadvantages requires wastewater discharge, and that sometimes is not easy to do. Discharge in high total dissolved solids. Again, it could, your wastewater folks may not like that. Not cost effective with high sulfates, again, because those sulfates combine with the brine and use up the brine's effectiveness before it even gets to the arsenic. Lime softening, talked about this briefly. Absorption of the arsenic or onto iron oxides, minimal removal from calcite alone. pH very important to lime softening. Remember, you're talking about pHs at much higher levels. General model that we talked about earlier can be used if iron is added to this process as well, be it from your natural source water or from an iron coagulant. Last, the RO and ultrafiltration advantages. Good removal. You're using RO or ultrafiltration model. Particularly RO will remove any one of those particles, and also removes the possible microbial contaminants. The disadvantage is that high wastewater volume, because for those of you that have not operated membrane filters, there's a lot of waste flow, and depending on which type of membrane you're using, the percentage of loss can be anywhere from 5 to 30%. they may be better these days than when I've operated membranes in the past, but you're still losing a lot of your flow. The you have to have pre-treatment in certain situations with these membranes because there's certain things that you can't put into the membranes themselves. And again, the costs of membranes, although the costs are coming down quite a bit, still have initial cost of installing them, operating them. The operation costs for higher because electrical takes a lot more pressure to run membranes. So you're using higher pressures and therefore using maybe bigger pumps with more energy costs. All right, let's take. All right, it's all nearly 12:30, and I told you folks that we would break for 20 minutes at 12:30. For everybody to take a little bit of an extended break. So it's now 12:30. So why don't we come back at 12:50, and we'll finish up our presentation. I'll get you. I don't know exactly when we'll be done. I have a feeling we'll probably be done about 1:45-ish. So it won't be exactly 7 hours. I'm sure that won't hurt anybody's feelings. So I'll catch everybody back here at 12:50. Get up, run around, relax, get a sandwich, whatever you need to do. See you soon. All right, folks, welcome back. We'll proceed with the PowerPoint slides. Again, we're not too far away from, so hang in there. We'll get through this together. All right. One of the things that we've concentrated on throughout the presentation was handling of any of the leftover arsenic residuals that were created as a result of whatever treatment process that we have decided on using. No matter what, we are going to have some sort of residual arsenic that we'll need to deal with. So a couple things we have to understand are the types of them, the options we have, and the limits to those options. So here's the different types of residuals that are created by the use of the different treatment processes that we can choose from. If you go down the left-hand column, there's the different types and the type of residual that it's going to create. So for the first three of the slides, or excuse me, the first three options for treatment are going to have either brines or solids. The activated alumina has both. We go down for the coagulation-assisted microfiltration, and then the standard treatment options will have some sludges to deal with and perhaps some solids as well. So there's different types of residuals that we'll need to address. Different waste disposal options. Okay, so you're going to have point of treatment, storage, that type of stuff. Sludge could maybe handled in a non-hazardous landfill, and you could dewater them. When you end up dewatering sludges, sometimes you concentrate them, so that could also maybe present an issue. With the brines, again, you could keep them on site and treat them using evaporation pond, which again will concentrate the brine. Possible to direct discharge depending on the level that you have, or possible chemically precipitate those, concentrate those, where at that point you'd probably have to put them into a hazardous waste type landfill. And any of the solids that may be created by the conventional type of treatment could end up with a non-hazardous landfill situation, provided that you can find one to take it. So here's some limits of those. Most solids residuals can be disposed at the non-hazardous landfills. Hopefully that's still true. I don't know. Maybe one of the people on the program that actually are running some of these facilities when you get your comment sheet, when you get your evaluation sheet, you can put in your notes whether that's true or not. So, or whether that's an issue in finding a non-hazardous site. So the federal regulations, the RCRA, that deal with these types of hazardous waste, limited to 5 milligrams per liter in liquid waste. So that's the limit for that. TPLs may limit local disposal options, so local laws and things may be an issue as well. Arsenic and biosolids, point of treatment, effluent limits, total dissolves from the brines themselves. Land application of biosolids, and this is an issue nationwide, particularly in the wastewater field right now. There's your land. There's some land application limits. You can see they change a little bit based on where they can be applied. Some of them have no restrictions. You have tract land application, and then if you get over to that 75 milligrams per kilogram, couldn't even land applied at that point. So this is the last thing I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to go into a lot of depth here. A lot of this work has already been done or in the process of being paid back. But there are some methods to finance retrofits, upgrades, or new construction for our arsenic removal facilities. There's a lot of places out there you can turn to. So state revolving funds, MDE has some of those funding that you could look at. You have a revolving loan fund that has no interest at all. You can pay it off over a number of years. Our rural utility service is something that we deal with a lot. You could talk to our circuit riders about this. They have loans and grant money available for rural areas and rural operations. I encourage you, not just for arsenic removal, but for other things as well. I encourage you to look into that if you believe that your plants are in need of some upgrades, repairs, or something that needs to be done inside of them. You can take a look at that. Disadvantaged area grants, there's some of those available. Again, you can check with our circuit riders about that. Public works infrastructure grants, things that EPA can do. USDA can work with you on certain issues when it comes to rural municipalities and things like that. Tax or special assessment, I know nobody likes to hear the T word, but occasionally when you're mandated to do something, you have to do it. And sometimes the only way to do that is to do it through taxing or have a special assessment for areas that this needs to be done at. Bonds, you can generate money through bonding. A lot of municipalities and local governments do bonding things where you can bond it out over a long period of time, for instance, 30 years. Private funding for public works projects. Sometimes these can work out. If a new business or something trying to get built and they have issues with water and arsenic and things like that, sometimes you can get additional money to provide those new businesses with water and wastewater services, and they can help you fund the cost of those connections. I'll give you a great, for instance, something I dealt with years ago. There's a casino in Anne Arundel County, Arundel Mills Casino. It's just south of the airport. Before they built the casino, and there's a giant shopping mall there as well. They did an assessment. They realized they were going to need a lot of water, and Anne Arundel County's infrastructure in that part of the county wasn't enough to supply the amount of water that they needed. So literally, the company the company that was going to build the mall and ultimately the casino kicked in money to build a pumping station to be able to supply that area. So there's sometimes those types of things can occur and you can take advantage of it. So there's different ways that you can look at, different things we can look at, not just for arsenic, but for other means of financing other things that may be needed at plants. And on the wastewater side, the same things apply. So I wish I wouldn't have took the break now. I didn't realize that was all the slides that were left. We could have been done several minutes ago. But anyway, I hope that you guys got something out of this class. I hope I wasn't too boring in presenting the class. There is no test associated with this class, so if you're sweating that, don't worry about it. I know it didn't go 7 hours, but you will get 7 hours of credit for it. I will be sending out a survey to you in the next couple days. In that email, there'll be a survey attached to it, and we'll also give you a link to the recording of this particular training video, this training, so that you can review it if you would like to do so. Please, it's not mandatory, but I would really appreciate that you would fill out the survey for training. I also will send you a certificate of attendance for the training as well. So again, I really appreciate people hanging around for the training. I didn't think I would enjoy doing trainings this way. It's not as easy as standing up. I can move around and stay loose. I don't know that I like teaching from a chair, but I'm getting used to it. There will be, again, I said at the opening, I know so I had some people join late. Please keep an eye out on the Maryland Rural Water website. We're constantly updating our training and hoping to provide some more web-based training for you, not just from me, but from some of our key vendors, engineering firms. They're supporting us as well through these trying times, and I have the utmost respect for you folks. All of you are essential employees. You're out there working your butts off in a time of need, and I really appreciate that. And you don't get the appreciation you deserve. I saw in the chat, Scott, I didn't get the last survey. I'm assuming that's from Don, and I will resend the one for coagulation, flocculation. Everybody, if you would, I'm going to go back. I'm going to give you my email address. If you need any information from me, get ready to write it. It is scott.harmon. So it's scott.harmon at md-rwa.org. And if you send me an email there, I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. And I can help you out with your training needs. If you have study needs for any tests that you're taking or any questions about your licenses, I can help you out with those as well. So again, let me see, cameras which would allow you to move around. I don't know what that comment was about. Yeah, I could get a camera that will allow me to move around. Thank you, I appreciate that. I got knee replacement, so I get stiff when I sit for a long time. Again, Don, I will send you that survey from Tuesday's class. And for those of you that took that Tuesday class, the video, I should be getting the video sometime today. As soon as I get it, I will post it to the people that took it. So again, have a great day, folks. Nice talking to you all again. Look forward to seeing you soon.